Hey, let's talk just a little bit about this particular Nitro is where you make the announcement about World War III, and you're going to explain it's going to be a 3-ring, 60-man battle royal. And I know this sounds a little silly, but I can't help but think, okay, 3 rings, 60 guys. It's at least twice as big as the Royal Rumble, which is going to happen in January. Were you just trying to get the jump on the big battle royal and you felt like, hey, we need something that can compete with the Royal Rumble, or am I off base with that?
It wasn't so much to compete with the Royal Rumble, but we wanted to at least be adjacent, and I wanted something that was different than,
Mm-hmm.
obviously the Royal Rumble is a very successful format. It was back then, still is. It's a great idea. Well, you don't want to copy somebody's idea exactly, but if we can take a good idea, tilt it 5 or 10 degrees one direction or another, make it feel a little bigger, a little different, it's worth a shot. And that's what this was. It was looking at the success of Royal Rumble. Keep in mind, we've talked about this on previous shows over the years. One of the goals, particularly at this time, in order to grow our pay-per-view business, let's go back to the beginning of this. When I took over WCW, we were doing 4 pay-per-views a year, right? So you had a lot of television to utilize to build up your story so that you could pay it off on a pay-per-view. Well, WCW was really in trouble financially from the time I showed up there till after I left, obviously. But the one opportunity we had, especially back at this time, was revenue opportunity we had was pay-per-views. So I added a 5th one. WWE added a 5th one. I added a 6th one. WWE added a 6th one. I mean, we really led the charge on the 12 pay-per-view schedule. And we were doing it out of necessity because I was focused on making that first dollar of profit, if you remember. And the only real way I could do that was by increasing the number of pay-per-views. Well, when you do that, in my opinion, at the time, and still to this day, is that you have to give those events unique personalities. Otherwise, it's a 3-hour television show that you're charging people money for. So I would always look for different ways, just like you would create a character with nuanced kind of physical attributes or the way they dress or the way they speak or whatever, right? All those little details that make up a character. I wanted to apply that same thinking to each pay-per-view so that they had it was branded and had its own personality and was different than the one before it or different than the one that's going to come up next. So the whole World War III idea was to, take a format that's working, tilt it 5 or 10 degrees, try to make it feel unique in every way that you possibly can, and have our own. And that's what World War III was. By the way, the execution of that idea pretty much sucked because we rushed into it. We didn't think through it. We should have tested the idea at least on a limited basis before we did it, because there were just a lot of production challenges that we didn't anticipate. I still think the idea was a good idea that was poorly executed.
Let's talk a little bit about what wasn't poorly executed that night. We're going to see Eddie Guerrero wrestle Sergeant Craig Pittman. We talked about that. And Eddie actually uses a leg scissor to Pittman's midsection and rolls him into a pinning position, and Eddie gets the win. And you are on commentary and you refer to this like it's a big upset victory. Between this and the Paul Orndorff, Mr. JL dark match earlier in the night, this to me, Eric, almost feels like it's marking when the merging of the two WCWs are happening since Nitro launched. You're trying to showcase the work rate guys or the future cruiserweight guys or whatever you want to call them with perhaps the old style of wrestling that WCW had presented. Did you feel like you had to have a paradigm shift here on Nitro? And is it fair to say that it's happening here in October of 95?
Oh, it was definitely happening by October of 95. It was a slow transition. If you go back and you look at WCW program, well, just look at this program. Look at the pay-per-view from Sunday, Halloween Havoc. The Dungeon of Doom. That was a leftover from that era where everything was an over-the-top character that was really created and targeted towards teens and preteens, right? That was WWE's bread and butter, and WCW, back when it launched all the way up until Nitro, was just a very cheap imitation of that, of WWE and their characters. It wasn't very successful. Nitro came along, and that was the beginning of a more reality-based presentation, not completely across the board. Obviously, we still had the Dungeon of Doom and all that silliness. But Craig Pittman, for example, was an amateur wrestler, and a damn good one. And he was, I believe he was a legitimate Marine. Could be wrong on that one. I'll have to go back and check. But Craig Pittman came to me through Brad Ringens. Brad Ringens was a member of the, I think, the 1980 Olympic team that didn't get to compete because of politics at that time. But Brad was a badass as a wrestler. He was the original, he was Kurt Angle before Kurt Angle showed up. Not as good as Kurt, Kurt was the gold medalist, obviously. And by the way, you can check out Kurt Angle at Real American Freestyle as one of our color commentators. Juliana Pena, shameless plug for Juliana Pena, two-time UFC bantamweight champion, also on color commentary with Kurt Angle. But Craig Pittman came to me through Brad, and I was really excited about using his freestyle wrestling skills and collegiate wrestling skills and trying to integrate it into our presentation. Craig was a legitimate badass. And I was obviously excited about the cruiserweight division and helping to develop guys like Eddie Guerrero. By the way, did you see on social media that one of Eddie's daughters is now breaking into the business?
I did. How cool is that? Yeah, she's going to be working with Booker T down in Reality or Wrestling in Houston. That's super cool, man.
That brought a smile to my face this morning when I saw that. It just, I like that kind of stuff. It makes me happy.
I want to ask about Eddie because, we're seeing Eddie get a win here on TV, which is a big deal. And you're clearly trying to introduce a new crop of talent to WCW fans and just the larger wrestling audience at large. Were you trying to just gauge crowd reactions, or were there other metrics that you used to figure out, who to push or who not to push? I bring this up because there's an urban legend, and I don't know if this is true, that maybe there was a focus group once upon a time that said Eddie Guerrero was perhaps the most likable wrestler in WCW. Did that really exist?
I don't think so. I mean, perhaps, and I just didn't see it, or I wasn't involved in it, or it just doesn't come to my mind. But focus groups, particularly at this time, and when Eddie was a part of WCW, was more about the brand than individual wrestlers. I didn't really utilize research to help me qualify or quantify, the value of a particular wrestler. That was instinct and feel. And to be honest, you got a show every Monday night. You've got anywhere between 5,000 and 15,000 people in your live focus group. So for me, I'd like to feel it as opposed to reading about it or looking at numbers and information. To me, when you've got, 5,000 to 15,000 people who have all come there and parted with hard-earned cash to watch your show, learning how to interpret their reactions to the extent that at some point you develop the ability to anticipate their reactions. And that's the sweet spot for me, was learning how to anticipate how an audience is going to react. That's, as a producer or even as a talent, that's where experience really comes in. Now, other producers probably are different. They just want to dive into the numbers and follow those patterns, and can be very effective, I guess, for some people. But for me, it was like, if I have an idea, I want to put it out in front of the crowd, and I want that, we'll call it 5,000, those 5,000 people who are paying me to do a focus group on my product. That's where I invested my time. And a lot of my decisions came from crowd reaction as opposed to numbers.
Hey, just in time for the holidays, what if you didn't have to worry about any of that credit card debt? If you're feeling stuck making the minimum payments and you don't want to have to put Christmas on a credit card, we can help at savewithconrad.com. We routinely help our listeners save hundreds of dollars a month. Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com.